Well, I haven't had a camera in my face for months.
Please be seated.
Huh.
I'd
But
like
they
to
are-
welcome you
this is-
today.
I think they're trying to get us going here.
I'm Lynn Wagley, President of the League of Women Voters of Boulder County. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We never support or oppose a political party or candidate. The purpose of this forum today is to give you an opportunity to meet your legislators and to inform you about proposed legislation. I'd like to thank Lisa Collins and Channel 22 who are taping this forum today, the Boulder Valley School District for the use of their boardroom, and Seal Ruffing who coordinated the event today. Our moderator today is Jeanette Hillary. Jeanette is a member of the Boulder County League and also chair of the State League's Legislative Action Committee. Jeanette will introduce the legislators and explain the format of today's forum. Jeanette.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn, and good morning and hello to everybody. This morning we're going to be having each of our representatives talk a little bit about the tenor of the legislature and what's going on in both the House and the Senate, and any specific bills that they have sponsored or are figuring out are going to come up forward, and then what have been some of the major issues, of which there have been many. I don't know we have enough time for all of them today, to address, because there's some really critical issues that the legislature is, offering. We're going to start with each of the representatives giving a 2-minute overview on what they see as, what's been going on in the legislature, any of their bills that they feel might be important or other issues that might be important. And then we're going to concentrate on other specific areas throughout the morning's discussion. So I want to start with Representative Dickie Lee Hullinghorst and have her sort of do a 2-minute overview of, and they're not programmed on whatever they want to say is perfectly all right. So, Representative Hullinghorst, good to see you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here as always. I feel a very strong kinship to all of you out there, many of you who I represent in my district, but the League of Women Voters has been such a stalwart organization in this community for a long time. You have provided us with great information and great support in the legislative issues that we like to put forward, and so I just want to thank you first for holding this, and thank you for being active members of my constituency, and I hear from you on a regular basis. This has been a very tough session so far. We have the overriding issue, of course, is the budget and the economy. And we are working very hard to reach some agreements on the budget so we can move forward with what we call the long bill, which is the budget bill for this next year. I think we'll go to that in some of the questions, so I'll save some of that discussion for later. I'd like to highlight a few of the things that I have worked on in the session, and one that I'm still working on, although a number of my bills have not met with great success this year in the House of Representatives, where I am now the minority. I serve on the Finance Committee as the ranking member and on the Appropriations Committee, so of course the budget has been something that has been foremost in our minds, and we've been working on issues related to that. One of the major pieces of legislation that I introduced was called Pay As You Go, and I thank the League of Women Voters for supporting that bill. It basically says that any tax expenditure, which includes tax credits and other things, needs to be addressed in terms of its funding source. And that bill, unfortunately, was killed, and we'll get to that, I think, in some of the questions. It was killed in the Finance Committee of the House. So I believe my time is up.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go to Representative Claire Levy, and she's in House District 13. Good morning.
Good morning, and I want to also thank the League for sponsoring this event, which you do every year, and it's a chance for us to check in and tell your members and those listening in the wider audience what we've been doing, how things are going. Mindful that 2 minutes passes very, very quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the atmosphere in the House, because I think we'll come back to that. The House is under Republican control. I want to just highlight 3 basic areas in which I've brought legislation this session, and I've actually had a fair amount of success so far. I don't want to jinx things, but I've brought a couple of bills in the energy area, which I do every year. And this year I've got a bill to look at restructuring how we site major transmission lines in Colorado to be sure that we can appropriately develop our renewable energy resources that we have in areas that tend to be remote from where the load centers are. I also had a bill signed by the governor last week that will make it easier for independent power producers to compete with Xcel Energy in providing energy to the grid. I've got a bill that finally made it out of the House on a unanimous vote. It looked like it might die at one point, called the Uniform Military and Overseas Voter Act, and we can talk more about that when we talk about election issues. And then the third area in which I've sponsored quite a number of bills is in the criminal and juvenile justice area. I do that every year. I think this is an area where Colorado, I could focus all of my time and energy in this area, and we'd never be done. But what I'm trying to do is restructure our sentencing process so that we focus as much on preventing new crimes from being committed as we spend on public safety. And I see my time is up, and I look forward to discussing more of these issues later on.
Next, we're going to shift houses and go to the Senate, and we're fortunate to have Senator Brandon Schaefer, and he's in Senate District 17. And so your view and what's going on and any bills or issues you have coming up.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting us today. I'm Brandon Schaefer. I'm the senator from Eastern Boulder County. I'm also the president of the Senate. And one of my functions is really to manage the process and make sure I'm the lead referee, if you will, in the Senate. Our focus coming into this session was to create jobs and to grow the economy, and our priority was to fund our education system as best we possibly could. That is all the way from preschool through graduate school, so P through 20. Essential in being able to do that is our budget process. We're in the process of negotiating that right now, and my priority there is to back off some of the recommended cuts that the governor's proposal had in it to our K-12 system, and we, I believe, are making some progress on that. Before the session's over, we will need to pass a redistricting bill. We redraw the congressional lines. By Constitution, we're required to redraw the congressional lines every 10 years. This is that session, the year that we are required to do that. So we'll be focusing on that in the latter part of the session here. We also have a couple of important economic development bills. Really, one deals with the healthcare exchanges. This is something that will help businesses in our state reduce the cost of healthcare. It is a bipartisan effort that has cleared the first hurdle in the Senate, and the next is to shore up our unemployment insurance trust fund. We have been working very diligently with the business community in our state to come up with a proposal to stabilize the unemployment insurance trust fund. A couple other things I'll just mention really quickly. I think I'm almost up with my time. We're going to try to reform the process for amending the state's constitution. And finally, at some point, I'd like to be able to talk about the civil unions bill that died in the House 2 days ago.
Okay. all of these are subjects that we're going to get back to in more depth a little bit later in the discussion. Next, we're going to go to Representative Matt Jones, and he's in House District 12.
Thanks, Jeanette. As Jeanette said, I represent House District 12, which is Louisville, Lafayette, and South Longmont. My overriding priority this year is to work on jobs, meaningful jobs for people. I had two bills to do that. The first bill would have taken the Climate Smart type program statewide for small businesses. Unfortunately, that died in committee, but I have a better prognosis for my second bill, which is the Small Business Navigator, which is a one-stop shop place where people can call or contact small business people who are very busy to sort out what they need to do with state government. The second thing I'm working on is protecting funding for education. The budget is a big part of that, and by protecting that funding, I hope to keep smaller class sizes alive. The third thing I work on is environmental issues. The Healthy Rivers Tax Checkoff is now law, a bipartisan bill I sponsored with Representative Sonnenberg from Sterling to help protect our rivers. And then finally, healthcare access is a big priority for me. I think it's a big challenge for people, and we need to provide meaningful access so that they can have their health issues addressed and not fear bankruptcy after a major illness. And so those are the things I'm working on: jobs, education, environment, and then healthcare access.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to Representative Deb Gardner, and she's with House District 11.
Thank you, and thank you to the League for putting this together and everybody that's here today. I can see on your table there you've got one of the gold sheets that we get. We periodically get from the League a sheet that gives the opposed, monitor, support, and I for one find it very helpful because I'm new, and the process is very fascinating to me, and I'm finding that I actually enjoy it, in that there's a lot of potential for input, but there's a lot of information that comes to us in the League's little handout is helpful to me. I did have a bill passed early on in the session, the Blue Alert bill, which is similar to set up a system similar to the Amber Alert system, but if a police officer is killed or gravely injured, and that was signed into law, and I'm very thankful for that. I've worked on a few other things, some of which I think we're going to talk about later, but one of them that I really liked was an energy efficiency bill that would have given a little boost for renters to be able to get information about their energy efficiency or non-efficiency in their apartments that they were renting. But I think one of the things that's interesting about the process is that even though that bill didn't pass, it died in committee, we've begun a conversation about that issue, and oftentimes that's the first step. It doesn't mean this is going away, and I think that was the case for many of the bills that I had that didn't pass, but we've begun the conversation, and we'll keep moving those things forward. One of the things I enjoy most is being on the Legislative Audit Committee, and this is a committee that's bipartisan and the only real oversight committee in the legislature, and we have the opportunity to look at all the pieces of state government and work to increase its efficiency and accountability, and in the past year they did some good stuff.
Thank you. Okay, I want to go back to one of the topics that Senator Schaefer brought up, and that's dealing with the civil unions bill, which, as you said, just died in the House this past week. It was a Senate bill. So maybe you could start and in, maybe 3 minutes go into some of the issues that had been going on in the Senate, and then I will go. Were any of you on that committee Representative Levy was on the committee that heard it. So maybe we'll then go to Representative Levy and hear her comments on that, okay?
Sure.
Senator Schaefer.
Thank you. What we're talking about is civil unions. It is not gay marriage. In our Constitution, there is a prohibition in the Colorado Constitution against gay marriage in Colorado. However, what we were looking at were an array of legal rights that we would give any couple. It could be a man and a woman, it could be a man and a man, it could be a woman and a woman. If you're in a loving relationship and you enter a contractual agreement, then for your partner, they would have things like the ability to inherit property without a will, or they would be able to visit you in a hospital if you were very sick. The typical rights that one would assume a married couple would have, things that you could enter into basically through a civil union recognized under Colorado law. I was very proud of that debate and dialogue as it moved through the Senate, whether it was the committee hearings or whether it was the floor debate in the Senate. It was a very civil, very intellectual debate. Of course, there was also emotion, and there were several very poignant stories that Democrats and Republicans alike told about loved ones of theirs, friends of theirs, who had run into issues because they were because they were gay, frankly. And when the vote finally came out, I think we had 23 votes in favor, so we picked up 4 Republicans who voted for it on the floor of the Senate. I think we debated it for about 2 hours before we finally voted. Again, it was one of those moments serving in the Senate that I was proud not only to be there and have the honor to represent the people of Senate District 17, but also to have the honor to serve in that chamber and with my colleagues there and be able to stand next to somebody that maybe you disagree with, but you respect where they're coming from and you respect the process. I was very disappointed, to say the least, that when the bill went to the House of Representatives, it died in committee, and that same ability to debate it with the full body was not made available.
Thank you. And Representative Levy, being on the committee that was listening to this bill.
Yeah, so I serve on the Judiciary Committee, which just heard the bill on Thursday, and I guess this gets rebroadcast, so Thursday won't mean anything by the time people are watching this on TV. But I do have to echo some of Brandon Schaefer's comments. I was proud of our body. While the bill unfortunately died in the Judiciary Committee, it was a very respectful hearing, and I think it was respectful on both sides. And the sad thing is that it really did deserve to be debated by all 65 members of the House. This, I think, is a very, very important question for the state of Colorado, and not one that just one vote in a committee of 11 people should determine. And so I was hopeful that even though we were quite certain that it was going to be a partisan vote, I was hopeful that at least one of the Republicans on the committee would at least be willing to let the bill go to the floor of the House for full debate. And I want to speak a moment about this partisanship issue. We had a number of people come and testify to the committee who were Republicans and who tried to emphasize that this is about people, it's about relationships, it's about relationship equity and justice. It's not about party lines. And it's unfortunate that I think when it came down to it in the House, it did become a partisan issue. And it was sent to the Judiciary Committee because leadership was quite certain it would die there. But I think what we heard over and over again is that this issue is not going away. People will still fall in love with people of the same sex. They will still want to have families. They will still want to have all the rights that heterosexual couples have. And so we'll just have to keep working on it for as long as it takes to get this done, because this is one of these fundamental watershed issues where years from now we will look back on it as we look back on laws that institutionalized racial segregation in our history, and we'll say that this was not a proud time for Colorado and not a proud time in our country. And we had the opportunity on Thursday night to look forward and do justice. And unfortunately, we didn't do that, but we'll be facing this again, I'm confident.
Hey, thank you. I wanted to move on to health care issues, and there have been a number of bills in the legislature this year, and some are still alive and dealing with it. We have Senator Aguilar's bill, and then we have the access bill. So maybe starting from the House perspective, and maybe either Representative Jones or Representative Gardner, you would like to talk about some of those health care issues and then get the Senate's perspective also. So if you want to have 3 minutes, Representative Jones, and since health is one of your issues, and then you can chime in also later on, okay?
Thanks. There are basically two big bills for health care access and to implement the federal reform. The first is a health care exchange where it's an exchange where people have access to private health insurance, and the states need to work on that and put it together by 2014, or the federal government will do that for us. And so it's incumbent on us to move ahead on that. The other bill, it's a Senate bill by Senator Aguilar, would be having a cooperative. And that bill is intriguing to me, and I'm a co-sponsor of it because I think we can deliver health care more cheaply through that. I think by putting together a cooperative and not having a lot of the administrative overhead that some of the private companies have, that we can deliver health care cheaper and every bit as effectively to people. And people who have gone through trying to get insurance when they were sick. I've survived 2 cancers in my life. I know what it's like and how hard it is to get cancer. The first of my cancers, I didn't have health insurance, so I know what that's like. I think that cooperative type of approach would give them better access and a better outcome, quite frankly. We all know how quickly people can become bankrupt in our society if they get really ill without insurance or with really poor insurance. And so I think it's really important that we step up and pass at least one of those bills. My preference would be to go with the cooperative.
Okay, and that is Senate Bill 168, and so that's where that is. And did you want to add something to that, Representative Gardner?
Yes, thank you. I too am a co-sponsor on Senator Aguilar's bill, and I think it creates a great opportunity for us. But I think I'm not sure that those two bills are even in conflict with each other. I think we can move forward maybe with both of them. But I think to Representative Levy's point, and she might have some more information about it, because I think there was an article in the Post today about the fate of the exchange bill, where there's some issues with that, where it's kind of again turning into one of those partisan things rather than being something that's really, moving us forward. But I didn't read the article, so forgive me, I don't have the exact details of that. But it's unfortunate because I think the people of Colorado are not served when we go there.
Yeah, I agree. Senator Schaefer, did you want to add more on what's happening in the House and some of the discussions there and some of the health bills?
What I can say is the exchange bill in particular, and for folks who don't understand and don't know what that means in a healthcare exchange, think of Travelocity. You go on your computer and you type in where you want to go, and then it comes up with the lowest cost flight, the lowest cost hotel, that sort of thing for your trip. Well, what we want to do is create an exchange for health care, which is very similar to that, where you go and you type in and say, here's the type of health care that I think I need, here's how much I want to pay, et cetera, and boom, all your options come up in one exchange, where it just makes it easier for consumers to understand the pricing structures of health insurance. So that's what we're talking about when we refer to an exchange. I believe that we will get that through in a bipartisan way. It's very difficult when it's very difficult to take your name off of a bill when you've gone as far out on the limb as Representative Stevens has on this. And I think at the end of the day, she'll stand by her sponsorship on that. I certainly hope so. I know that the governor's office, Senator Boyd in the Senate, and Representative Stevens in a bipartisan collaborative have worked very hard to get that to a place where we can work the politics and the policy and accomplish something good for the people of Colorado.
Yeah. It's access for a lot of people, and it's something that the League has always been in support of and trying to encourage more access for that. I wanted to move to voter service. We have had a flurry of voter service bills this year. It's keeping the Secretary of State and the League very busy. I know that Representative Levy has mentioned it. I'd like any of you to chime in, but maybe you could give 5 minutes to discussing some of the voter service bills that you have introduced. I know you had introduced a bill, Representative Gardner, on voting for 16-year-olds, the access to register early. So maybe we could discuss some of those voter service bills and what's going on there, and then any other comments that other people might have. Representative Levy.
Okay, thank you. And I guess by virtue of sitting on the Judiciary Committee and the State Affairs Committee, I'm getting a lot of airtime here, which I'm happy to share. So I know the League is very interested in facilitating voter participation, and that's one of the wonderful things about this organization. But as Jeanette was teeing up the question, I was thinking most of the bills, with the exception of Representative Gardner's bill that we've been hearing in the State Affairs, have been more about voter disservice than voter service. I mentioned briefly my Uniform Military and Overseas Voter Act bill, which is about enfranchising those who are living overseas, whether they're in the service or civilians. And the aim of that bill was to align the timelines of requesting a ballot, receiving a ballot, getting information about what candidates and issues are on the ballot with getting that information in a timely way, so that those who are overseas, who are citizens and who are entitled to vote, can actually exercise that right to vote. And happily that bill did pass, as I said before. But we've had a slew of bills come to State Affairs that seem more about trying to disenfranchise people than about trying to enfranchise people. We had a bill to require voters to present photo ID at the polls when they go to vote, even though there's no evidence that people are showing up trying to impersonate other voters. We have a bill that we've not yet dealt with on final action, but it was unfortunately voted out of the State Affairs Committee, that would allow the Secretary of State to comb through the voter rolls, matching them against databases to try to find people who are not citizens. Again, even though we don't have any evidence that people who aren't citizens are trying to vote in Colorado, and also even though the databases that the Secretary of State would be authorized to use weren't established for the purpose of determining citizenship for voting purposes. And so I'm rather disheartened by the fact that when voter participation barely exceeds 50% in many years, and voting is the hallmark of our constitutional republic, there seems to be more effort directed towards weeding out people and preventing them from vote than trying to facilitate votes. There was a bill that the sponsor pulled that would have required all mail ballots for all even year elections, I believe it was. And that was a bill that was very controversial. I actually don't know what I would have done on that bill. I needed to hear that. We know that people do like to vote by mail, and so it would facilitate greater voter participation, but the bill as drafted didn't allow enough opportunity for people who didn't receive a ballot to go to a vote center and to get registered or to clear up any problems there might be with their registration. And so I think if we are going to move away from precinct-based election day voting opportunities, we do have to be very, very careful to be sure that we aren't disenfranchising people who move frequently or who, for one reason or another, have difficulty voting by mail. So those are, I think, unless you want to remind me of a bill that I'm forgetting.
No, I was looking at our
I think
list.
those are the
I think we've
highlights.
hit every
And
one
I'll
of
let
them. And there's been
Representative
a
Gardner
lot,
talk
but maybe
about
Representative
her.
Gardner
She
would
had
like
an
to add
outstanding bill.
her bill on the, which we've looked at. So, if you want to give, 2 or 3 minutes to some of the issues you faced when you were doing the bill and what's happened and other perspectives you may have.
Well, the bill we're talking about would have allowed 16-year-olds to register to vote, pre-register to vote when they were getting their driver's license. And they wouldn't be eligible to vote. Same rules would apply as normal until they turned 18. But the movement from being ineligible to eligible would be automatic when you turn 18. And the idea, again, is about increasing access. And this bill came to me, the idea of the bill came with the help of Representative Levy and New Era Colorado and other groups that are interested in increasing participation. And there is some, other states have done this. So we wouldn't be on the absolute cutting edge of this, but there's evidence that says that 16-year-olds, younger people, particularly in groups of, people of color or people in poverty, that those groups have a harder time getting registered to vote or are less likely to register to vote when they turn 18. But if we could, and the thinking is if we could capture them at really their first access point into the system when they go to get their driver's license at 16, then there's an easy place of entree, and now they're on the list, now they're on the rolls, and so when they turned 18 it would be automatic that they become active voters. And because normally then we wouldn't see those 16-year-olds in the system until they had to come back at 21 when they get your driver's license going the other direction. So this was an easier thing. But that went to the State Affairs Committee, and I had good support from all the Democrats on that committee, but unfortunately all the Republicans voted against it. But again, that issue's not going away. We're going to bring it back because it does increase access, it does increase voter participation, and it was one of the neatest parts of that presentation to the committee was the young people that came and testified to how important it was to them to be able to feel like they were legitimate participants in the process, that they didn't have to wait until they were older, even though their interest was beginning to get sparked in their civics classes. So I think, and their teachers came, and they were so disappointed that the process didn't work for them. But I think they also realized, this is how this works. We can all come, we can say our say, we can be listened to. And so I think they'll be back, I'll be back with this bill, and we'll find a way to get more support to begin the process.
Okay, most of the bills in voter service have been started in the House. There has been one that has started in the Senate. From the Senate's perspective, Senator Schaefer, did you want to add anything else on any of the voter registration bills?
I'm gonna pass on that. I think that both Claire and Deb have done just a fantastic job covering the ground, so I don't think I have anything in addition to contribute.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go now to the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's the budget. And I'm going to start, if I could, with Representative Hullinghorst and give you 5 or 6 minutes to kind of, from your perspective, what's been happening, and then I'll go to the Senate side. The long bill, which is the budget bill for the state, has been introduced. It was a little bit late getting out there. And there's a lot going on. And we know it's a dynamic issue right at the moment, but, what's going on? So Representative Hullinghorst, if you want to start there.
Thank you very much. Well, the biggest problem with the budget is that we don't have enough money in the state of Colorado. I think you can put it in a nutshell there, and we're struggling with that and have been struggling with that for the past 3 or 4 years. Over the last 3 years, we have met shortfalls of over $4 billion, and by the time we get done with this budget, it'll be probably another half of $1 billion that we will have met in terms of shortfalls. When we have this kind of a situation where where we don't have enough revenues to meet the core services that the state must provide, there are really only a few areas that we can go to make up the large amounts of money that need to be made up in the budget. Unfortunately, K through 12 education is one of those big buckets of money. That we spend about 46% of our budget, or our last budget was about 46% dedicated our general fund to K through 12 education. The other big buckets of money include public safety, which is corrections and other public safety issues, health and human services, and higher education. So when you see the cuts coming in those areas, you know that it really is the only place we have to go in many instances. And that's been the biggest issue that we've been facing here is, and we've heard so much from our constituencies, all of us from all over the state, about the great concern, particularly cuts in K through 12 education, which in the governor's introduced budget was a little over $400 million. I am very confident, and I'm sure we'll hear from Senator Schaefer some of the latest information on this. I am confident now that we're going to be able to pass a budget that that doesn't have that big a cut to K through 12 education. It has been a very difficult process of compromise and negotiation among both the Senate and the House and the members of the Joint Budget Committee. And as you know, the bill has been delayed in its consideration because of the issues that we have. But my hope is we will be able to reduce that. But my warning is that we will not be able to reduce it, in my opinion, to anything that is an acceptable level. But we just have to face reality. In my opinion, it is unacceptable to be 49th or 50th, and we will probably be 50th here very soon, among the states in funding of K through 12 education. I don't think that's what the citizens of this state want for their state, but it is the issue that we have. We have an issue here where it isn't just expenditures. It isn't just spending dollars in state government that's the problem. It's revenue. And we simply are not raising enough revenue to meet the core issues core services that we want to provide in this state. We are, I think all of us, and I encourage you to be a part of the budget process and the process over the next few years. I think it's going to be our responsibility, and I certainly want to take on some leadership role in this responsibility of working with all of the citizens of the state of Colorado to define what we really want as a state. And do we really believe that we should have a first-class education in this state for everybody, and should we invest in that? And based on all of the information I get, when I go out and talk to businesses in my district, and I always ask them the question, well, why did you locate here? What were some of the reasons? And they always bring up education. They need an educated workforce. They need to be close to a research university. They want to have a quality of life for their families, for the employees that they need to recruit. So I just can't believe that we as a state can't come to some understanding of what it really takes as a state, what we really are going to have to do in terms of our revenue to make this work. Back to the budget issues that we have this year, one of the reasons that I introduced the pay-as-you-go bill that was defeated, and we have been in the Finance Committee for every bill that comes through, adding that amendment if we can, and we have been defeated in almost every instance, where you have revenue tax expenditures, and those are primarily tax credits or tax incentives that are given out to special interests for some reason, and it's generally the reason of creating jobs or helping the economy, and clearly we want to do that. We don't have any great proof that those work. We have not to date found funding sources for those. And so that's just when you start looking at balancing the budget, that really does put everything out of balance. We just passed out of Finance and then Appropriations Committee yesterday a repeal of the business personal property tax that would be a fiscal note next year of about $37 million out of the School Finance Act, and it would be an impact to local governments, including school districts, of about $190 million. That is not an acceptable approach to balancing the budget with no funding source. So those are the kinds of things that we are going to have to resolve in the legislature if we move forward effectively to balance the budget.
Okay. And thank you. And then Senator Schaefer. And then I want to come back and maybe see, there was a study done through the last year, the DU study, as we're calling it, and the results finally came out, which I think has been having some input into the Joint Budget Committee and other discussions. So we can discuss that maybe after your update on what's happening with the long bill and some of the budget issues.
Sure, and let me just let me correct one thing you said at the very beginning here, which was that we have, in fact, introduced a long bill. We haven't.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry.
Has not quite come forward yet, although I think we're very close. We'll see if we have any fruitful conversations over the weekend. Whenever I talk about the budget, I always try to create some context so people understand where we are and how we got here. And I go back to the year 2001. In the year 2001, the size of the state's general fund budget, so these are your sales tax dollars, these are your income tax dollars, the size of the general fund budget in 2001 was about $6.6 billion. That, of course, backs out any federal funding that the state might get on top of that. But the general fund budget that the legislature appropriated in 2001 was about $6.6 billion. When you fast forward about 9 years, so picture yourself May of 2010 when we passed a balanced budget, the size of our budget in 2010, 9 years later, was again approximately $6.6 billion. It's not that we just stayed flatline at $6.6 billion. We did go up and then we came back down. When we say that we've cut over $3 billion out of the budget over the last 3 years because of the economic situation, that's how we got back to the $6.6 billion level. At the same time, over the course of those 9 years, we've added over 700,000 new Coloradans, 70,000, and these are very conservative estimates, over 70,000 new students in our K-12 schools, over 35,000 new students in our institutions of higher education, over 150,000 more people on our Medicaid rolls, et cetera, et cetera. Going into the session and even now, the question I get most often is, how are you going to balance? You've got these shortfalls. We've got a higher demand for services, and we continue to have decreasing revenues, although our last economic forecast actually came in above the forecast, so it is an indication that the economy is turning around. But we still have about a $500 million or $600 million gap to fill as we go forward and balance this year's budget. Last year we did some things that unfortunately are on the list again this year. Last year we cut $260 million out of K-12. This year in the governor's budget proposal we're looking at $332 million out of K-12. Last year we cut $60 million out of higher education. This year in the governor's budget proposal it's $36 million. Last year we cut about $36 million out of state employee pay. We're looking at making a similar cut again this year. So many of the things that we ended up doing last year are again on the table for this year for many of the reasons that Dickie Lee mentioned. We have very little flexibility as to where we can make those cuts. We have a web of either constitutional or federal requirements that govern how we can spend our money, and at the end of the day, between 5 and 9% of that general fund budget is actually discretionary, where the legislature can make decisions about where those dollars can be spent. I've been working very hard, and I know many of us up here have been working very hard to, especially in the K-12 area, to back off the size of the proposed cut that came out of the governor's proposal. So we're working to get the $332 million suggested cut down to about $232. I don't want anyone to think that we're fixing education funding. We are reducing the size of the cut, understanding, realizing that the cut that ultimately will be made here will be very significant for local school districts. And as we look forward, we'll be looking for ways to fix the structural issues that we have with our budget. And I think Dickie Lee talked about those. That might be a good segue to go into the DU study.
Yes.
And I don't know if somebody else
Yeah,
wants to kind of take the baton and run with it from here.
I wanted to go to Representative Jones because I know education is important to you. Obviously, a lot of it is centered on what's going to come out of the state's budget, and for everybody knows that our budget has to be balanced in the state of Colorado, so it's not, willy-nilly spending. It's really a true numbers crunching and looking at where to cut. But how do you, maybe you could discuss some of the issues from the DU and how this might, or what it came out saying about education, an issue that's important to you. And then I'll get other people to want to jump in, okay? So we'll start with about 3 minutes on what some of your concerns or issues are in the budget.
Thanks, Jeanette. I had hoped with the recovering of the economy, we could kind of grow ourselves out of the problem. What the DU study showed was that that's not going to happen. And if I remember my numbers right, the long-term growth over to 2035 is when they projected out to, is flatter than the growth in cost of education or Medicaid. I think it's 4% for the economy, 6% for schools, 8% for Medicaid. And so the bottom line is that we have a hole that the economy is not going to get us out of, and that's why we need to have the conversation with the public, what kind of state do they really want. The other thing, as far as this year's budget, that I think, we talk in these terms of billions of dollars, or billions and millions of dollars. What the cut that the governor proposed would have been a $500 cut per child, and that's where our economy is. And if you figure a starting teacher with benefits is at about $50,000 a year, you can run that out and see how it affects class sizes. It's a very real cut. I believe last year's cut was 6%. The projected cut, the proposed cut this year was somewhere in the course around 8%. And when you do that, you start, instead of having 26, 27 kids in a room, you start having 32 and 33. And the teacher has to change their whole work plan to try to meet the need and give people individualized attention. And it's much harder to teach a child. And so the outcome of that is that kids have a harder time learning, and we, in my opinion, we jeopardize our future. We make it less likely to have young people who are very prepared for the workforce and to do a good job and go out and feel good about themselves and contribute and help our tax base in the long run. And so it's a very short-sighted approach, I think, to back off to that degree, and that's where we are with the shortfall. We, by Constitution, have to balance that budget, and we'll do that, but for me, we need to protect that class size as much as we can.
Okay, and I know that Representative Levy would like to also add some information and insight, and I'm sure Representative Gardner may have something also. Representative Levy.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to just go back to the DU tax study also just for a minute, and Senator Heath, who couldn't make it here this morning, was the prime movement behind getting this study done. And I think what his hope was is that if we could have an objective, scholarly examination of our tax structure in Colorado, that would create sort of a baseline set of commonly understood facts from which we could then build to address the structural problems we have in Colorado that Dickie Lee talked about, the lack of revenue. The tax study looked at a number of principles of taxation that any tax structure ought to have. It looked at the regressivity or lack thereof. It looked at the efficiency of the tax system in terms of are we collecting what we're owed, but is it also set up in a manner that functions well? It looked at the stability of our tax structure. There were 5 areas, but those were the 3 that jumped out at me. And one of the issues that this study highlighted is that our tax structure is actually very, very volatile, or our revenue stream, very volatile relative to other states and relative to our needs. And the reason it's so volatile is that we rely inordinately on income tax, and in Colorado, our income tax seems to rise and fall very quickly based on the people's capital gains revenues. And surprisingly, this is different from many other states. The study also illustrated that over time, the major source of our revenue has shifted from much more steady sources towards income tax. And this is because people don't spend as much money on goods as they used to, generating sales tax. There's now a lot more service purchases which aren't subject to sales tax. And so our revenue sources have become much more weighted towards income and therefore more volatile. But I just wanted to point out, in addition to the fact that it's abundantly clear that we will not have enough revenues to meet our needs as we grow, we have structural issues. Even if we decide we want to keep our revenue at the same level, there are just structural issues with where we get the money and how we get the money that we should be fixing before we even address the issue of how much money we should spend.
Okay. And Representative Gardner, I know you have a financial background and interest, so maybe you could add another perspective on the DU study and some of the budget issues that you're looking at.
Well, I think a couple of things with regard to what we've been doing as a group is that I think it was about 3 weeks ago on a Saturday, then the Democrats, both from the House and the Senate, organized listening tours all around the state. And there were hundreds of people that participated. I know we had 75 just in our group in Longmont, and so it probably actually was more in the order of thousands of people around the state who participated in this. And there were some unifying, common themes that came throughout that. And one was the importance of education and how all these cuts to the education system were really undermining our future as a state and our ability to be able to, draw good jobs, good companies to the state of Colorado because of the potential of having a diminishing workforce that would be able to participate in that economic growth. And it really, at our group that we had in Longmont, easily more than 60% of the people were there and talking about the peril to our education system. And for some of those people that I know personally, they are going to lose their jobs this year. They have been told already, don't bother to come back here next fall because you're not going to have a job. And that's very real to the people that live and work in our neighborhoods, and it's going to impact the ability for our school districts to teach our kids, and it's just so fundamental. And I think one of the other things I wanted to talk about was what Representative Hollinghorst had talked about, those tax credits that we have out there that we kind of instituted with the idea that this is going to stimulate the economy. And I think it's on the order of about $2 billion a year, and without, which is a big number, and without any real justification of what we get for that as a state. Are we really getting what we hope for that? And two, we don't really know where they go. There was a bill that came through the Business and Economic Development Committee that would have required the Department of Revenue to report to all of us where those credits were going, what companies were getting them, to what degree, what were they getting them for. And that bill died in that committee on a party line vote with the Republicans voting against it, and so it didn't see the light of day. But I think we're going to try and go through the Legislative Audit Committee, back to that Oversight Committee, and see if we can shine a little light on, find another way to shine a little light on that problem. But I think that's something that we need to know if we're going to be part of that conversation about how can we be the state we want to be.
Okay. Now, a number of you have mentioned that we just don't have revenue. And there's a number of questions from the audience regarding some of the potential initiatives. And I don't know if any of you, maybe Senator Heath, who could not be here today, has said that he wants to bring out an initiative on increasing, revenue. And also the Colorado Fiscal Policy Institute has said that they want to also bring out something to, we need revenue. And so maybe if any of you have any information and would like to address that, and again, maybe Representative Hullinghorst, if you have 2 or 3 minutes to kind of address some of those initiatives, what's happening there.
Thank you. Claire and I had a budget listening town hall meeting a couple weeks ago, I believe it was, and we heard a lot from our constituents that attended that meeting, almost unanimously, that there was great interest in addressing the revenue side of this, trying to find a way to raise additional revenues. And as you all know, because of Tabor, anytime we increase taxes in the state of Colorado, that has to go to a vote of the people. So that has to come from all of you. And there seemed to be a good deal of interest in doing that. We have not heard that universally across the state. So as usual, I'm very proud of our constituency. I think they're way out front on many of these issues, and as usual, out front on this one. And really demanding of us that we take a leadership role in doing that. I think we all want to do that. I also think it's going to be very, very difficult with our economy not moving as quickly back as we want to see it, with still a lot of unemployment in Colorado, a lot of struggling on the part of some of our hardworking taxpayers. It's going to be very hard to get a tax increase on the ballot, I think, in 2011. But I would like to take some time on behalf of my good friend Raleigh Heath to at least talk a little bit about what his proposed initiative is. He's withdrawn his first one, but that's for a technicality. But his proposal is, and I think he wanted to start here to see if he could get a coalition going that might forward something like this, is to just take the sales tax in the state of Colorado and the income tax back to where it was in the 1990s, when we had surpluses at a state level, and when then Republican Governor Owens and the Republican legislature decided that the best way to address that surplus and address the problem of running up against the Tabor limits and having to do refunds was to do some across-the-board tax reductions. And one of those was to the sales tax from 3% down to 2.9%, and a reduction in the income tax rate, the flat rate, which, and I don't, somebody has to remind me.
5%.
Yeah, from 5%. So Raleigh Heath's proposal is just simply to bring that back up, and he, in an election of the people, back to where it was before we cut it, and to do that for 3 years, to sunset it in 3 years. I think he believes now, if we're going to go to all the trouble and the input that he's gotten on it, to do an initiative like that, that it should just be permanent. And then we need to talk about additional revenue, and I think that's what many of us are concerned about, is that that will only solve a very small part of the problem. We still will have a revenue shortfall even if we do that. So we need to put our heads together, but I don't think we're going to get this job done really and get something effective on the ballot that has a chance of passing until maybe 2012, unfortunately.
Okay. Did anybody else want to add in the initiative? Yes, Representative Levy.
Thank you, Jeanette. Just quickly, you mentioned the Colorado Fiscal Policy Institute as well, and one of the things that we heard, Dickie Lee and I at our budget listening tour meeting, was interest in a progressive income tax structure, and that has a great deal of appeal, and that was something that the Colorado Fiscal Policy Institute was thinking about putting on the ballot, and that organization has now decided not to. And they made that decision because they heard from the business community that they would not support that. And it is going to be important. Dickie Lee talked about the challenges of getting something passed. It is going to be important to have the support of the business community for anything that goes on the ballot. And so I just wanted to mention that one element, because I think there's a great deal of interest in trying to have a tiered income tax structure and not have the flat 5% tax, but the determination's been made that we just couldn't get the coalition together to get that passed.
Yeah. Okay. Now to lighter fare, potentially, if there is such a thing. We've had a number of juvenile justice bills in the last few sessions, and I know you had introduced one this year also, Representative Levy, and maybe you could spend 3 minutes or so talking about that bill. And then, since corrections is such a large part of our budget, what have been ways that we might have been looking at things? And then I'll go to you, Senator Schaefer, also to respond to that. Representative Levy.
Oh, thank you. Well, and the League's been a wonderful supporter of the bills that I've done on juvenile justice, and I'm gratified to have the support of the League. And the bill that Jeanette's asking me about died on Tuesday, and it was a bill to make the change in the law that was passed in 2006 to do away with life without parole for juveniles, to make that retroactive so that the 48 kids that were 15, 16, and 17 years old when they committed their crimes and who were sentenced to die in prison would be eligible for parole after 40 years. There were concerns about the constitutionality of this bill because of the potential that it infringed on the governor's powers of pardon and commutation. We felt, my co-sponsor and I, Republican Representative B.J. Nickel from Loveland, who was a fabulous co-sponsor to have on this bill, we had gotten an opinion from a constitutional law professor at the University of Colorado Law School that it was not unconstitutional. That's an issue that we weren't going to be able to settle in the House Judiciary Committee or on the floor of the House. It was an issue that ultimately would have to be settled by the Supreme Court. That bill did die, unfortunately, and the concerns were about finality for the victims of those offenses that were committed during this period of time in which juveniles could be sentenced to live out the rest of their lives in prison, and concerns about constitutionality. I've been more successful in the past, though, on a couple of fronts. One is in getting some review of individual offenders, juveniles, before they are, if they're charged as adults, before they're transferred to jail, where by federal law they have to be separated by sight and sound from adults, which effectively means solitary confinement. We've gotten a bill passed that requires the prosecutor and the defense attorney to consult on whether this is appropriate for this offender. whether it would be safe to keep the kid in the juvenile system. I got a bill passed last session with Senator Hudak that requires school districts to provide an education to the juveniles who are transferred to adult jails. And then also with bipartisan support, the minority leader of the House last session, I finally got a bill passed that pulls back some of the unilateral power that prosecutors have to transfer juvenile offenders into the adult court. We now have judicial review for 14 and 15-year-olds who are going to be transferred to adult court. So we've had some success, and going to have to just keep plugging at it.
Yeah. Senator Schaefer, from your perspective and in the Senate, what's happening with some of the judicial issues, juvenile justice issues, and anything
Sure.
else?
Before I go down that road, I want to just acknowledge the work that Claire has been doing in this area. I mean, she has really stepped forward as the foremost expert, but she also has become the most effective legislator I've seen, at least down there, working in these areas. Congratulations on all the work, and thank you for what you're doing. You're really making a difference. You know, the focus I've had on the Department of Corrections and juvenile justice, unfortunately this year, has been more related to dollars and cents than it has been to good policy, like the things that Claire's. It involves good policy too. You know, one of the things we were looking at was making some reforms to the parole system. There are some significant cost savings that we could capture if we did it the right way. I will be very honest that we have pulled way back on that discussion, and it has everything to do with this incident up here on the hill next to the campus, where this young man murdered another student from New Hampshire, I believe, and he was on parole. And you see one incident like that, and you think, well, maybe that's not the direction to go. So that was a discussion that was ongoing, and I think that it is that is tamped down quite a bit. We are looking at in the context of parole, there may be some opportunities around geriatric patients or patients that have terminal illnesses, where the threat that they pose to the public is none because they're bedridden, essentially. And there may be some cost savings associated with that we can then use to help offset some of the cuts that we've already discussed in our budgets. Other than that, there have been very little, there's been very little discussion. There have been very few bills in the Senate that have focused specifically on juvenile justice this year.
Okay. I want to move to the issue of redistricting, which you had brought up initially, Senator Schaefer. And as I had mentioned earlier, there was a 10-member panel, bipartisan, that was formed in the legislature, first time. And the co-chairs are Senator Heath and Representative Balmer. And they've been holding meetings around the state to look at what are of issues and concerns within each of the congressional districts. And I wanted to know, from starting with you, Senator Schaefer, what might be a timeline for introducing a bill? Do you know at this point if it might be a Senate or a House-sponsored bill, or would there be a couple, whatever? And then also we'll go to the House and see what reactions are there, and maybe give a discussion of about 5 minutes on, what have been some of the issues that have been brought up that you're aware of, et cetera.
Well, the idea originally came out at a meeting that the Speaker of the House and I had, and discussed what process we wanted to employ. In that meeting, we also recognized that we were going to have a delay in getting the data. We based the new lines on two things, essentially the census data that comes out of Washington, D.C., and then we get the voter registration data out of the Secretary of State's office based on the most recent elections, so the 2010 elections. And that way, the people, people who are on the select committee or the General Assembly has the ability to get a sense of where people live and how to create competitive districts based on voter data. And since we knew we were going to have this delay, we thought an appropriate way to utilize the time before we got the data was to deputize this Joint Select Committee and send them out to all corners of the state and hear from the electorate. And I think it's worked well. I think we've heard some very constructive suggestions from citizens, and we have had a number of very positive meetings on the Western Slope, on the Eastern Plains, up and down the I-25 corridor. So far it's working out very well. The Joint Select Committee in its original charge was required to make recommendations, whether that's a suggested map, which we would introduce legislation based on, or just say, hey, look, here's what we heard, here's what we recommend, any map that comes out of the legislature contain these principles as it moves forward. The deadline for that was April 14th. We didn't want to do tax day, so we chose not to do it on the 15th. Unfortunately, we're still waiting for some of that data. We haven't gotten the data from the Secretary of State's office yet, and we're in communication with Scott Gessler and the people who are working in their elections division to see if we can get that data from them next week. As a result, we have extended the deadline by a week. So now their deadline is April 21st, and hopefully we can get a proposal that has consensus in the Joint Select Committee, and we haven't worked out the logistics of whether that bill is introduced in the Senate, introduced in the House, but presumably if we have consensus, we have 10 members in the Joint Select Committee who can vote for a concept going forward, it won't really matter whether it's the House or the Senate. We'll be able to then move that through the entire General Assembly fairly quickly and get it down to the governor for his signature.
Okay. Anyone from the House? Yes, Representative Hullinghorst. And,
Thank you. I would like to compliment Senator Schaefer for the work that he did to get the nonpartisan review committee going, and also our colleagues in the state legislature who took the time to be a part of that and who have, in the middle of a session that's pretty busy anyway, traveled all over the state to listen to people. I went to the hearing that was held here at the university for the Boulder area, and they listened to hours of testimony. There were a large number of people there, and I think everybody that attended felt they really had an opportunity to have their say about congressional district lines. I'm hopeful when we finally get the data that there will be enough time for that committee to work and to make a recommendation to the legislature that we can act on. It's our job to do that. It's going to be a difficult job with two different majorities, a Republican majority in the House and a Democratic majority in the Senate, but I think we are all committed to trying to solve that problem and to get a bill that works. As probably many of you know, the overriding principle of one person, one vote is very strong in this process, and the case law indicates that we can't be more than one or two people off per district without it being effectively challenged. So that is a very big job for that committee and for the legislature to come out getting it done, but we're hopeful. I also wanted to just point out, and for those of you who aren't living and breathing this right now, that this really deals with just the congressional district lines. The state legislative lines will be drawn by a reapportionment commission that will be appointed here the first part of April. We'll be seeing the members of that fairly soon, and that's thanks to the League of Women Voters, who I think it was the 1970s. Some of you probably remember, who brought that ballot issue forward, and we now have a hopefully fairly bipartisan and objective commission to do that work for us here before the end of the year, we hope.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Representative Jones.
Yeah, just a couple other things. It is set up to equal out one person, one vote. every 10 years the census happens. One of the big reasons for the census is to do redistricting. On the state legislative side, it's the reapportionment commission that does that work, and there are 4 members from the legislature, 3 the governor appoints, 4 the Supreme Court Chief Justice appoints. And the other thing I might point out is that in the past, the election season really didn't get started as early as it does now. And so there's going to be a big pressure this year to get the reapportionment done earlier so that it's not bumping into nomination processes and caucuses and assemblies and that. And so that will be interesting to see if it can be sped up. Having served on that commission 20 years ago, there's an awful lot to do.
Okay, thank you. We're getting close to wrapping up, and I want to give each of you maybe 2 minutes to see where you're going to go for the remainder 5 weeks of the session. And I'm going to start with Representative Gardner, and any of your specific bills or just what other issues you see are going to be coming forward within the next 5 weeks or so.
Well, thank you, and thanks again for giving us this opportunity to be here. And I think a couple of things going forward. One, it doesn't matter what issue we're dealing with down at the State House. The irony of it is that we're representing all of you, but we kind of have a tendency to operate within that building, and so it's incumbent, I think, upon everyone that's here and the people that are listening to, be sure and contact us. And I think contact us in a very personal, meaningful way. I know there are times when we might get 300 kind of spamish emails about a particular issue, but that one that really tells a story about why you're in favor or against a particular issue is very helpful. And I know that in addition to listening to the little thing I get from the League, I also try to listen to, and as I know everybody does, to what I hear from people. And so please continue to do that, and I'd encourage you, the more you do that, the better it is. But I think going forward, obviously, looming large will be the budget, and the being new and not having been through that process, I'm trying to kind of study up a little bit about what's happened in the past so that can be prepared to be able to be helpful to the process going forward. But and I'm sure there are probably some other things that are kind of looming out there that I may not even be aware of. So I'll just stay on my toes, pay attention, and and do the best I can, and listen to my colleagues that have been there a little bit longer than I have for some good advice when I need it. So thank you again for hosting this today.
Thank you, Representative Gardner. And we do publish our legislative letter every 2 weeks throughout the entire legislative session, and it is we give it to our legislators to let them know our positions on bills, but there's also a subscription fee for the entire session. Anyway, moving on to Representative Jones.
Thanks, Jeanette, and thanks for doing this. League of Women Voters have been doing this for a long time. Actually, up in Weld County, my father was the president of the League of Women Voters, which is kind of fun. But it tells you how open-minded he is, to go out there and do that kind of thing. But I agree with Representative Gardner. Please stay in touch with us. It really grounds us. You get in the building, the Capitol building, and then you get out and you kind of go, oh, this is reality, not that. And so have us keep in touch. What I'm going to be working on, just what I said at the beginning, jobs. I want to get my small business navigator bill that I'm sponsoring signed by the governor. We have to agree with Senate amendments first to do that, but that should be my third bill passed. The other huge thing is the budget and how little harm we do to education, and that will be a priority. And it's interesting to me, this late in the session, we're about 2/3 through now, how the health care bills are just getting rolling, and those are going to be very important and be taking time at that point.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to Senator Schaefer, and your wrap-up there.
Well, again, thank you all for having us. This is always a pleasure to do. I think this is my 7th one of these, so it's always something I look forward to. I'll close with where I began. I think a successful session will be one where we come up with a bipartisan agreement on a balanced budget going forward. I think it's important that people of Colorado understand that we balance our budget in Colorado every year. We're not Washington, D.C. We're not going to just roll it over into a credit card account for next year. We will balance the budget. If we can get this redistricting thing done, I think that'll be a huge accomplishment. 10 years ago, we had the midnight gerrymander and all kinds of things just kind of fell apart with that process. So that is a very difficult process. I think we're off to a good start on it, and I'd like to be able to stand on the west steps of the Capitol at the end of the session and say that we were able to accomplish that in a bipartisan way. We talked a little bit about health exchanges. I think that's a very important thing for the state of Colorado, whether it's a cooperative, whether it's the exchanges, or a combination of the two. I think that that's something that we owe it to the people of Colorado to take on and pass again, hopefully in a bipartisan way. Didn't talk much about constitutional reform, preventing people from abusing the initiative process to put amendments in our Constitution. That's something that we've done some work on already. Hopefully that'll be ready for a final vote in the next week or two. We also have some things that we can do with the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund to shore that up, to make sure that we have a fiscally sound safety net there for people who are getting themselves back into the workforce. So thank you again very much.
Thank you. And Representative Levy.
Thank you. And I also want to thank the League of Women Voters for giving us this opportunity to speak to you, those of you here and those of you who will watch the replay. I still have bills coming forward, and I hope that they pass. But rather than talk about those, I guess I want to reflect a little bit on what has been a new experience for me this session, which is to be in the minority in the House. And while we still have the budget to come along and we still have redistricting and some very, very big issues to address, I think at the end of this session, at the end of the 120 days, I think all of us, Democrats and Republicans, will be looking back at how we did. Did we manage this division of power as well as it could have been? Did we follow through on the commitments that we made at the beginning of the session to work in a bipartisan fashion, to address jobs, to address the budget, to address the other very important issues, or did we kind of fall victim to appealing on both sides to our base, to our more activist voters? And I think and I hope that maybe this first session was a learning experience, and that while in the House there was a great deal of posturing and appealing to more radical elements in the other party, that as we go forward with divided government, that we'll actually learn how to work together and realize that at the end of the day, the voters, the people who we serve, want us to get things done. And it's not as important who gets credit for it as that we get it done. So I'm trying to be a student of political science in this process to see how we can do better in the future.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Hollinghorst.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank all of my colleagues from this area. It's really it's an honor and a privilege to serve all of you. And it's also an honor and a privilege to serve with my colleagues who are the best in the state legislature and who have provided great leadership and great advice to me as I try to do the best I can as a state legislator. And I won't talk so much about the one bill I have left that could pass in this session among many that didn't. But I will talk about what my major goals are here in being a state legislator. representing all of you and doing the best I can for the state is, of course, the most important reason. But I strongly believe in fiscal conservatism as a government. That always surprises my Republican colleagues in the House when they hear that from me, because they think I'm this wild liberal from Boulder. But it is the way to go. It is the way to go with all governments, I believe, on behalf of our hard-working taxpayers. And I think we, as a state, as we begin to look, and I hope, at raising some taxes, bringing new revenue into the core services that we believe we should provide to the people of the state of Colorado, that we prove that we have a very effective and efficient government. My last bill that I hope will pass deals with employing lean government principles and doing training and having our state employees do that in the process of their strategic planning and their budget planning. I think all of these kinds of things we need to bring to bear, and we need to be very transparent and accountable in that process so that our taxpayers know how we're spending our money, that we're doing it judiciously, that we're doing the very best we can, and then maybe we will have the opportunity to spend some additional revenue to do the things that we believe the people of the state of Colorado deserve.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of the panelists for taking time out of your busy schedule to come here today and share a lot of insights that we don't automatically know and that don't get reported in the newspapers, and what are critical issues to you. And I think Lynn will be wrapping everything up.
And again, thank you for your time today. And we want to thank all of our legislators for the hard work you're doing at the state capitol. Thank you very much, and that concludes our program today.
Thank you.